There we are. Hey. Now I think we're actually factually live, unlike how I screwed up last time. And, yeah. I might have had 3 viewers, at least, if I was able to pull this off last night, but I didn't. Oh well. Alright. I was in the mood to get around to this book because I believe I heard in some interview maybe 2 years ago or something, Michael Tsarion mentioned something about Heidegger being important. And I think specifically it was Being in Time, which we're going to start reading tonight. I'm going to go for probably about 2 hours. And then I'm going to do my evening rituals and go to bed. Because it is a work night, unfortunately. Anyway. We're going to be reading this stuff that has been translated from German. So there will be translators' anecdotes explaining away certain terminologies expressed in the English. I didn't get an explicit translation of certain Greek terms because I can't read Greek. I can read Latin. I can even read German. But I can't read something that is using letters that I am not familiar with. Anyway. Let's see here. Boom shakalaka. All right. That on over here, and we're good. So we're going to kick things off at introductions. I don't want to get into the weeds with the translator's preface and all that stuff. And one of the big things that I want to get on about in talking about this book is the interesting juxtaposition as, one who goes through this experience of life, in a proactive manner, right? I am one of the conscious, right? I am, I have basic awareness. I have things that have led to my wisdom, to things that are considerably overall successful traits. At least successful in not biting into the drag downs and dregs of the mind of the social construct. And we'll get into all that stuff. And like I said, I'll be reading the anecdotes from the translator when they pop up. Hopefully I don't miss them because they're little, it'll say 1 in the middle of the passage. All right? So, introduction. Exposition of the question of the meaning of being. Part 1. The necessity, structure, and priority of the question of being. 1. Necessity for explicitly restating the question of being. This question has today been forgotten, even though in our time we deem it progressive to give our approval to metaphysics. Again, it is held that we have been exempted from the exertions of a newly rekindled word in Greek, term in Greek, if you will. Yet the question we are touching upon is not just any question. It is one which provided a stimulus for the searches of Plato and Aristotle, only to subside from then on as a theme for actual investigation. So theme for actual investigation is where we get our little anecdote. So, whoops, I come down to 1 at the bottom. Als Theimesch Frage Werlicher Untersuchung. When Heidegger speaks of a question as the Massich, he thinks of it as one which is taken seriously and studied in systematic manner, while we shall often translate this adjective by its cognate thematic. We may sometimes find it convenient to choose more flexible expressions involving the word theme. Heidegger gives a fuller discussion on H363. What these two men achieved was to persist through many alterations and retouchings down to the logic of Hegel, and what they rested with the utmost intellectual effort from the phenomena, fragmentary and incipient though it was, has long since become trivialized. Not only that, on the basis of the Greeks' initial contributions towards an interpretation of being, a dogma has been developed which not only declares the question about the meaning of being to be superfluous, but sanctions its complete neglect. It is said that being is the most universal and the emptiest of concepts. As such, it resists every attempt at definition. Nor does this most universal and hence indefinable concept require any definition, for everyone uses it constantly and already understands what he means by it. In this way, that which the ancient philosophers found continually disturbing as something obscure and hidden has taken on a clarity and self-evidence such that if anyone continues to ask about it, he is charged with an error of method. At the beginning of our investigation, it is not possible to give detailed accounts of the presupposition and prejudices which are constantly re-implanting and fostering the belief that an inquiry into being is unnecessary. They are rooted in ancient ontology itself, and it will not be possible to interrupt that ontology adequately until the question of being has been clarified and answered and taken as a clue, at least. If we are to have regard for the soil from which the basic ontological concepts developed, and if we are to see whether the categories have been demonstrated in a way that is appropriate and complete, we shall therefore carry the discussion of these presuppositions only to the point at which the necessity for restating the question about the meaning of being become plain. There are 3 such presuppositions. First, it has been maintained that being is the most universal concept. Then there's a term in Greek, and then it goes into Latin. Illid quo primo cadit sub apprehensions est ens quis intellectus includitur in omnibus cumque qui apprehendi. If that sounded French, it's probably because I'm of French lineage, and French is just old German trying to learn Latin. Hey! What's up, Baldy? Baldy gets to moderate. All right. First, I'm sorry, I read that already. An understanding of being is already included in conceiving anything which one apprehends as an entity. And I find it very interesting, the interplay between the words being and entity, and especially the way that word interplays in our modern language in the discussion of paranormal encounters, albeit interdimensionals, aliens, ghosts, monsters, dream spirits, etc., etc. We all use that word, entity, or a being, or a consciousness, even, right? A sentient consciousness, right? All these seem to be very appropriate terms for when we have some sort of encounter with an alien that somehow is real, but almost completely unreal, because it practically happened only to you in a way that it's madness to speak of it to others, even though it seems perfectly rational, the course of events to you. This gets into deeper points about being that I had read already when I screwed up the live stream and you didn't know it, because I didn't hit go live like a schmuck. But anyway, so the first annotation on this page was einer am Sienden erfasst, the word Siendes, which Heidegger uses in his paraphrase, is one of the most important words in the book. The substantive das, or dasiand, is derived from the particle of siand and means literally that which is. Ein siandes means something which is. There is much to be said for translating siandes by the noun being or beings, for it is often used in collective sense. We feel, however, that it is the smoother and less confusing to write entity or entities. We are well aware that in recent British and American philosophy, the term entity has been used more generally to apply to almost anything whatsoever, no matter what its ontological status. In this translation, sorry about the cough in your ear, forgive me. However, it will mean simply something which is. An alternative translation to the Latin quotation is given by the English Dominican fathers of Summa Theologica, Thomas Baker of London, 1915. For that which before all else falls under apprehension is being, the notion of which is included in all things whatsoever a man apprehends. So, but the universality of being is not that of a class or genus. The term being does not define that realm of entities which is uppermost when these are articulated conceptually according to genus and species, then another Greek term. The universality of being transcends any universality of genus. In medieval ontology, being is designated as a transcendence. Aristotle himself knew the unity of this transcendental universal as a unity of analogy in contrast to the multiplicity of the highest generic concepts applicable to things. With this discovery, in spite of his dependence on the way in which the ontological question had been formulated by Plato, he put the problem of being on what was, in principle, a new basis. To be sure, even Aristotle failed to clear away the darkness of these categorical interconnections in medieval ontology. This problem was widely discussed, especially in the Thomist and Scotist schools, without reaching clarity as to principle, and when Hegel at last defines being as the indeterminate, immediate, and makes this definition basic for all the further categorical explications of his logic, he keeps looking in the same direction as ontology, except that he no longer pays heed to Aristotle's problem of the unity of being as over against the multiplicity of categories applicable to things. So, if it is said that being is the most universal concept, this cannot mean that it is one which is clearest or that it needs no further discussion. It is rather the darkest of all. 2. It has been maintained, secondly, that the concept of being is indefinable. This is deduced from its supreme universality. Let me see. Is that an IV? What is that? Let me look down here. Protecting oneself. Zoo and express. All right, we're going to keep going and I'll figure it out. And rightly. So, if definitio fit per genus proximum et differentiam specificum, being cannot indeed be conceived as an entity. Enti non adutur aliqua natura, nor can it acquire such a character as to have the term entity applied to it. Being cannot be derived from the higher concepts by definition, nor can it be presented through the lower ones. But does this imply that being no longer offers a problem? Not at all. We can infer only that being cannot have the character of an entity. Thus we cannot apply to being the concept of definition, as presented in traditional logic, which itself has its foundations in ancient ontology, and which, within certain limits, provides a quite justifiable way of defining entities. The indefinability of being does not eliminate the question of its meaning. It demands that we look that question in the face. Thirdly, it is held that being is of all concepts the one that is self-evident. Whenever one recognizes anything or makes an assertion, whenever one comports oneself towards entities, even towards oneself, there's number one. Number one is down here. I see it right on the screen. Actually, let me scroll down because you can't see it on your screen. In fact, that's going to be a little off screen because of the way because I'm in the wide screen and the way I am. You'll just have to trust me. There's stuff cut off, I now realize. And it's the way my page scrolling is set. It's kind of skips over the page. Rules guide, reverse. What is read mode? Hold on a second. Let me see how that changed things. Oh, that seems to have blown everything up to ridiculous proportions. I don't want that. Okay, let's get out of read mode. Oh, thank you. All right, that's better. Just give me a second. View, first view, reflow, night mode, rotate. View, settings, assistant. All right, I can't do this now. Anyway, in jedem verheltens zu sindem, in jeden sich zu sich selbst verhalten, the verb verhalten can refer to any kind of behavior or way of conducting oneself, even to the way in which one relates oneself to something else, or to the way one refrains or holds oneself back. We shall translate it in various ways. Okay. Some use is made of being, and this expression is held to be intelligible without further ado. Just as everyone understands, the sky is blue, I am merry, and the like. But here we have an average kind of intelligibility, which merely demonstrates that this is unintelligible. It makes manifest that in any way of comporting oneself towards entities as entities, even in any being towards entities as entities, there lies a priori an enigma. 2. Sei macht offenbar das in Jetten verhalten und sein zu sienden als siendem a priori ein Rätsel liegt. The phrase sein zu sienden is typical of many similar expressions in which the substantive sein is followed by the preposition zu. In such expressions, we shall usually translate zu as towards. For example, being towards death, being towards others, being towards entities within the world. The very fact that we already live in an understanding of being, and that the meaning of being is still veiled in darkness, proves that it is necessary, in principle, to raise this question again. Within the range of basic philosophical concepts, especially when we come to the concept of being, it is dubious procedure to invoke self-evidence, even if the self-evident, Kant's covert judgment of the common sense, and then we go to 3, die Geheimn Urteil der geheimen Vernunft. And then I think once we go to the next page, hold on a second. It's often the work it may be used for. I don't know if that's, no, that's not the same. That's for a different passage. So he just marks what the German was there that he was going with, I guess. I don't know precisely what purpose that was serving, but fine. Okay. Is to become the sole explicit and abiding theme for one analytic, the business of philosophers. By considering these prejudices, however, we have made plain not only that the question of being lacks an answer, but that the question itself is obscure and without direction. So, if it is to be revived, this means that we must first work out an adequate way of formulating it. Part 2. The formal structure of the question of being. Right? This gets all very epistemological at this level, right? Because you're setting the rules for your philosophy. That's epistemology, is the rules of your philosophy. In other words, the way that you gather knowledge, the process by which you gather knowledge. Epistemology was a word I learned when I discovered Ayn Rand's objectivism. The question of the meaning of being must be formulated. If it is a fundamental question, or indeed the fundamental question, it must be made transparent and in an appropriate way. 1. Dan bedarf solches Fragen der Engmenessenen Durchsichtigkeit. The adjective durchsichtig is one of Heidegger's favorite expressions and means simply transparent. Perspicuous, something that one can see through. We shall ordinarily translate it by transparent. See H146 for further discussion. We must therefore explain briefly what belongs to any question whatsoever, so that from this standpoint the question of being can be made visible as a very special one with its own distinctive character. And forgive me for butchering German. It's fun when I know I'm pronouncing it right. Every inquiry is a seeking, suchen. Every seeking gets guided beforehand by what is sought. Inquiry is a cognizant seeking for an entity, both with regard to the fact that it is and with regard to its being as it is. In seinem das uns so sein. That's for 2. This cognizant seeking can take the form of investigating, Untersuchen, in which one lays bare that which the question is about and ascertains its character. Any inquiry, as an inquiry about something, has that which is asked about, sein Gefretes. But all inquiry about something is somehow a questioning of something. Anfragen bei. So, in addition to what is asked about, an inquiry has that which is interrogated. Ein Befragtes. Befragtes. In investigative questions, that is, in questions which are specifically theoretical, what is asked about is determined and conceptualized. Yeah, you hear that in investigative questions. Those kinds of questions are theoretical. Or it's within theoretical investigative questions, if you will, right? Meaning that I think it's the same way that it's like when you make an implication within a question, right? I try not to make implications within a lot of my questions because I'm a Scorpio ascendant and I'm really good at asking questions that get right under your soul. It's just one of those crazy talents because a Scorpio is one of the most shadow worky signs by its very nature. All right. When one makes an inquiry, one may do so just casually, or one may formulate the... Did I miss the three? Oh, okay. This is what is really intended. Excuse me, I missed that part. So, 3. Das eigentlich intendete. The adverb eigentlich occurs very often in this work. It may be used informally, where one might write really or on its part, or in a much stronger sense, where something like genuinely or authentically would be more appropriate. It is not always possible to tell which meaning Heidegger has in mind. In the context which seems relatively informal, we shall write really. In the more technical passages, we shall write authentically, reserving genuinely for genuine or echt. The reader must not confuse this kind of authenticity with the kind which belongs to an authentic text or an authentic account. See H42 for further discussion. In the present passage, the verb intendeden is presumably used in the medieval sense of intending, as adapted and modified by Brentano and Husserl. Brentano and Husserl. Pretty sure that's Husserl, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, with this, the inquiry reaches its goal. Inquiry itself is the behavior of a questioner, and therefore of an entity, and as such has its own character of being. When one makes an inquiry, one may do so just casually, or one may formulate the question explicitly. The latter case is peculiar in that the inquiry does not become transparent to itself until all these constitutive factors of the question have themselves become transparent. So this is kind of getting into those Cartesian levels of understanding oneself, and what it's doing is that it's taking the conversation a step further, because it's what is it? Cognito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am, or whatever it is, right? Well, it is by the merit that you had to ask questions. They had to ask these questions as such. That gives you this inherent kind of beingness, or an awareness of your beingness, if you will. The question about the meaning of being is to be formulated. We must therefore discuss it with an eye to these structural items. Inquiry as a kind of seeking must be guided beforehand by what is sought. So the meaning of being must already be available to us in some way. As we have intimated, we always conduct our activities in an understanding of being. Out of this understanding arise both the explicit question of the meaning of being and the tendency that leads us towards its conception. We do not know what being means, but even if we ask what is being, we keep within an understanding of the is, though we are unable to fix conceptually what that is signifies. We do not even know the horizon in terms of which the meaning is to be grasped and fixed, but this vague average understanding of being is still a fact. Let me just double check to make sure I didn't miss any numbers. Okay. All right, good. And so I find it very interesting. You see, this is a proper context to talk about the deeper meaning of is. I don't think that the man who used the definition of is in his legal defense on the world stage was thinking of Heidegger as some sort of intellectual brownie points to win his case. You see? Okay. However, much this understanding of being, an understanding which is already available to us, may fluctuate and grow dim and border on mere acquaintance with a word. Its very indefiniteness is itself a positive phenomenon which needs to be clarified. An investigation of the meaning of being cannot be expected to give this clarification at the outset. If we are to obtain the clue we need for interpreting this average understanding of being, we must first develop the concept of being in the light of this concept and the way in which it may be explicitly understood. We can make out what this obscured or still unillumined understanding of being means and what kind of obscuration or hindrance to an explicit illumination of the meaning of being are possible and even inevitable. Further, this vague, average understanding of being may be so infiltrated with additional theories and opinions about being that these remain hidden as sources of the way in which it is prevalently understood. That what we seek when we inquire into being is not something entirely unfamiliar, even if proximally we cannot grasp it at all. And then the annotation here is Zunachst. This word is of very frequent occurrence in Heidegger, and he will discuss his use of it on H370. Before, in ordinary German usage, the word may mean at first, to begin with, or in the first instance, and we shall often translate it in such a way. The word is, however, cognate with the adjective na, and its superlative nacht, which we shall usually translate as close and closest, respectively. And Heidegger often uses Zunachst in the sense of most closely, when he's describing the most natural and obvious experiences which we have at an uncritical and pre-philosophical level. We have ventured to translate this Heideggerian sense of Zunachst as proximally, but there are many borderline cases where it is not clear whether Heidegger has what Heidegger has in mind, or whether Heidegger has in mind this special sense or one of the more general usages. And in such cases, we have chosen whatever expression seems stylistically preferable. So we have to ask ourselves, is that honest? We don't know, because, unless we know the German and know the original writing in question, we're just going to have to trust his judgment, and he gave a fair, robust explanation for his purposes in some cases of making it mean such a thing. and thus to consider that when that term comes up down the line in the future of the book, and does it all make sense in the way that it linguistically flows? Does it sound like the truth? The truth has a frequency. We all know this. Okay. In the question which we are to work out, what is asked about is being, that which determines entities as entities, that on the basis of which Warhofen entities are already understood. However, we may discuss them in detail. The being of entities is not itself an entity. If we are to understand the problem of being, our first philosophical step consists in not this Greek term here, in not telling a story. That is to say, in not defining entities as entities by tracing them back in their origin to some other entities, as if being had the character of some possible entity. Hence, being as that which is asked about must be exhibited in a way of its own essentially different from the way in which entities are discovered. Accordingly, what is to be found out by the asking the meaning of being also demands that it be conceived in a way of its own, essentially contrasting with the concepts in which entities acquire their determinate significations. Insofar as being constitutes what is asked about, and being means the being of entities, then entities themselves turn out to be what is interrogated. These are, so to speak, questions as regards their being. But if the characteristics of their being can be yielded without falsification, then these entities must, on their part, have become accessible as they are in themselves when we come to what is to be interrogated. The question of being requires that the right way of access to entities shall have been obtained and secured in advance. But there are many things which we designate as being, or sein, and we do so in various senses. Everything we talk about, everything we have in view, everything towards which we comport ourselves in a way is being, and what we are is being, and so is how we are. Being lies in the fact that something is, and in its being as it is, in reality, in presence at hand, in subsistence, in validity, in Dasein, in the there is. Now we hit the first annotation for the page. Sein liegt im Das und so sein in Realität Vorhandenheit bestend Geltung Dasein im es gibt on Vorhandenheit present at hand. See notes. On Dasein, see notes on 1 page 27. That seems to be maybe the next page or so. But Dasein is kind of the cornerstone word in this book, as I understand it from some studies that I heard on Heidegger back when I thought I was originally going to be reading the book, and so I had an awareness of Dasein. And Dasein is kind of like it's a very special kind of state of understanding and awareness of your being in time, if you will, right? Okay, where were we? Show an example. Okay. Oops, let me go back up again. Okay, essentially contrasting, which is very sense validity. Okay, all right. In which entities is the meaning of being to be discerned? From which entities is the disclosure of being to take its departure? Is the starting point optional, or does some particular entity have priority? When we come to work out the question of being, which entity shall we take for our example, and in what sense does it have priority? If the question about being is to be explicitly formulated and carried through in such a manner as to be completely transparent to itself, then any treatment of it in line with the elucidations we have given requires us to explain how being is to be looked at, how its meaning is to be understood and conceptually grasped. It requires us to prepare the way for choosing the right entity for our example, and to work out the genuine way of access to it, looking at something, understanding and conceiving it, choosing access to it. All these ways of behaving are constitutive for our inquiry, and therefore are modes of being for those particular entities, which we, the inquirer, are ourselves. Thus, to work out the question of being adequately, we must make an entity, the inquirer, transparent in his own being. The very asking of this question is an entity's mode of being, and as such, it gets its essential character from what is inquired about, namely being. This entity, which each of us is himself, and which includes inquiring as one of the possibilities of its being, we shall denote by the term Dasein. And then here's the big spiel on Dasein. The word Dasein plays so important a role in this work and is already so familiar to the English-speaking reader who has read about Heidegger that it seems simpler to leave it untranslated, except in the relatively rare passages in which Heidegger himself breaks it up with a it says hyphen, but I think that might be a typo of hyphen. Anyway, to show its etymological construction, literally being there. Though in traditional German philosophy, it may be used quite generally to stand for almost any kind of being or existence, which we can say that something has the existence of God, for example. In everyday usage, it tends to be used more narrowly to stand for the kind of being that belongs to persons. Heidegger follows the everyday usage in this respect, but goes somewhat further in that he often uses it to stand for any person who has such being, and who is thus an entity himself. See H11 below. Okay, so heading back up here. If we are to formulate our question explicitly and transparently, we must first give a proper explication of an entity or Dasein, which regard to its being. Now, I'm going to add my own thought in here about everything about Dasein and everything else. And the thing about being is, right, it's about being able to kind of, like, my take on being, comes from, meditative practices, doing the whole shaman thing, being somebody who's had a paranormal experience or two, somebody who's had an interesting encounter in a dream or two, someone who looks and notices powerful and mundane auguries, someone who has been witness to many a deja vu that you just didn't know what the heck it meant, but it made you feel different, right? That's part of the significance of it. And you eventually kind of feel yourself slipping into almost like a parallel reality where everything looks exactly the same, you think, but something just is in the uncanny valley, right? I mean, life for me compared to 20 years ago, I feel like I'm living in an uncanny valley of the same life I was living 20 years ago. It's surreal, and not because like I've gone through all these changes. I'm talking about the world changing, and then this is my point. It's the juxtaposition of you and everything that is not you. And so you can get lost in that and say that you don't exist because all you do is react to everything that is not you. And it's easier to define yourself as what you're not, which is everything else, which you don't resist in the first place. As to not be in conflict with everything else, because there's an expectation of acceptance, and thus security and stability, and the comfort of predictability. And it's crazy when that world gets rocked by somebody who is unstable in the first place. For me, I'm like uranium because of Uranus and its placement in my chart, right? So I'm already like for me, I'm much more comfortable, in certain respects with unpredictability, with instability, just because, I don't know, it's just part of my comfort level, right? It's just like, I show up. Am I wearing a shirt? I don't know if I feel like wearing a shirt. I don't feel like telling anybody. I don't feel like telling myself to wear a shirt. I'll just feel like wearing a shirt. Why? Because I'm comfortable with my state of being. Unless I explicitly know there are rules that will deny me service, right? It's just like, hey, I don't wear a mask unless it's the only way that I can get something that I must get, that makes my state of being uncomfortable. You understand? And there are two kinds of people. People that knew that it was important to preserve their state of being regardless of what the world needed them to do, and those that found it easier to change their state of being altogether. And that's a horrifying level of conditioning that I think comes from people that are as separated from their Dasein as possible. Because ultimately, we're talking about the expression of the soul. You're talking about soul, ultimately, right? And just the soul mind, trying to encapsulate in words, in rational words, the existence of your soul mind, and trying to prove that you found your soul mind and understand your soul mind, and here's how you can find and understand your soul mind. And that's the idea in explaining what Dasein and being in time is. To me, that's what I get out of it all at this point. Is there not, however, a manifest circularity in such an undertaking, if we must first define an entity in its being, and if we want to formulate the question of being only in this basis? What is this but going in a circle in working out our question? Have we not presupposed something which only the answer can bring? Formal objections, such as the argument about circular reasoning, which can easily be cited at any time in the study of first principles, are always sterile when one is considering concrete ways of investigating. When it comes to understanding the matter at hand, they carry no weight and keep us from penetrating into the field of study. But, factically, which comes from factish, while this word can often be translated simply as in fact or as a matter of fact, it is used both as an adjective and as an adverb, and is so characteristic of Heidegger's style that we shall, as a rule, translate it either as factical or as factically, thus preserving its connection with the important noun factisiert, which means facticity, and keeping it distinct from tatsächlich, which means factual, and verkligt, which means actual. See the discussion of Tatsächlichkeit and Faktizitat in sections 12 and 29 below, H56, 135. Okay. But factically, there is no circle at all in formulating our question as we have described. One can determine the nature of entities in their being without necessarily having the explicit concept of the meaning of being at one's disposal. Otherwise, there could have been no ontological knowledge heretofore. One would hardly deny that factually there has been such knowledge. And then we have this last one says, deren faktischen Bestand man wohl nicht lugnen werd. And that's all it seems to give me. All right. Of course, being has been presupposed in all ontology up till now, but not as a concept at one's disposal, not at the sort of thing we are seeking. This presupposing of being has rather the character of taking a look at it beforehand, so that in the light of it, the entities presented to us get provisionally articulated in their being. This guiding activity of taking a look at being arises from the average understanding of being in which we always operate and which in the end belongs to the essential constitution. This word is the Wessenverfassung and Verfassung is the standard word for the constitution of a nation or any political organization, but it is also used for the condition or state in which a person may find himself. Heidegger seldom uses the word in either of these senses, but he does use it in ways which are somewhat analogous. In one sense, Dasein's Verfassung is its constitution, the way it is constituted, sa condition humaine. In another sense, Dasein may have several Verfassungen, as constitutive states or factors which enters into its constitution. We shall, in general, translate Verfassung as constitutions or constitutive state according to the context. But in passages where constitutive state would be cumbersome and there is little danger of ambiguity, we shall simply write state. These states, however, must always be thought of as constitutive and essential, not as temporary or transitory stages like the state of one's health or the state of the nation. When Heidegger uses the word constitution, he shall usually indicate this by capitalizing constitution. All right, hang on. Presupposing, where do we go here? That was two. For understanding of which it belongs to the essential, of the sign itself. Such presupposing has nothing to do with laying down an axiom from which a sequence of propositions is deductively derived. It is quite impossible for there to be any circular argument in formulating the question about the meaning of being. For in answering this question, the issue is not one of grounding something by such a derivation. It is rather one of laying bare the grounds for it and exhibiting them. Before I read the annotation, I just wanted to talk about, I found it interesting that the word chosen is axiom. Presupposing has nothing to do with laying down an axiom from which a sequence of propositions is deductively derived. So the axiom is just, it kind of means your way of life, in effect, right? It's kind of a particular, it's almost a particular kind of Dasein. And everybody knows the word axiom, because axiom was the big vessel housing humanity off, just drifting out in a nebula, waiting for Earth to be green again, while everybody is under under their little contract with By and Large, that company and all that stuff. So they're all on the axiom. They're all like, this is the way we do things because the Earth is destroyed and our robots haven't cleaned it up yet. And we're still waiting for there to be green, so you better be on our axiom, dependent on us. And we're going to force you to be dependent on us because you asked us to protect you. And we're going to protect you the way we understand to protect you, right? And that is the presence of the axiom, the presence of the system in your mind that you've agreed to. So your axiomatic thought process is the manner in which you navigate your world, or Wereld, in the Old Norse, Wereld, man-time, perception of reality. So, annotation 2. Weil es in der Beantwortung der Frage nicht ein Ebendienst begründen, sondern auf wissend Grund Freiligung expressions of the form of is get appears very often in the work. We shall usually translate them by variants on is an issue for. All right. At the end of this passage, we're going to take a quick intermission. In the question of the meaning of being, there is no circular reasoning, but rather a remarkable relatedness towards or forward, or relatedness backward or forward, which what we are asking about being bears to the inquiry itself as a mode of being of an entity. Here, what is asked about has an essential pertinence to the inquiry itself, and this belongs to the ownmost meaning, the eigensten Sinn, of the question of being. This only means, however, that there is a way, perhaps even a very special one, in which entities with the character of Dasein are related to the question of being. But have we not thus demonstrated that a certain kind of entity has a priority with regards to its being? And have we not thus presented that entity which shall serve as the primary example to be interrogated in the question of being? So far, our own discussion has not demonstrated Dasein's priority, nor has it shown decisively whether Dasein may possibly or even necessarily serve as the primary entity to be interrogated. But indeed, something like a priority of Dasein has announced itself. Okay, before we go on to part 3, like I promised, we are going to take a short break. Let me see how things are going with the stream. Everything looks okay. All right. Enjoy some terrible noise that I just love. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Terrible noises that I just love. Okay, we're back. Yep. The beginning of the show was the scalar process from France, and then that was monstrosity. I don't know where they're from. They're on Metal Blade Records. That's all I know. Alrighty. Let's rock and roll. We were at part 3. The ontological priority of the question of being. When we pointed out that the characteristics of the question of being, taking as our clue the formal structure of the question as such, we made it clear that this question is a peculiar one, and that a series of fundamental considerations is required for working it out, not to mention for solving it, but its distinctive features will come fully to light only when we have delimited it adequately with regard to its function, its aim, and its motives. Hitherto, our arguments for showing that the question must be restated have been motivated in part by its venerable origin, but chiefly by the lack of a definitive answer and even by the absence of any satisfactory formulation of the question itself. One may, however, ask what purpose this question is supposed to serve. Does it simply remain, or is it at all a mere matter for soaring speculation about the most general of generalities, or is it rather, of all questions, both the most basic and the most concrete? Being is always the being of an entity. The totality of entities can, in accordance with its various domains, become a field for laying bare and delimiting certain definite areas of subject matter. These areas, on their part, for instance, history, nature, space, life, Dasein, language, and the like, can serve as objects which corresponding scientific investigation may take as their respective themes. Scientific research accomplishes, roughly and naively, the demarcation and initial fixing of the area of subject matter. Just making sure I didn't skip over any annotation notes for this page. No, I didn't. Okay. The basic structure of any such area have already been worked out after a fashion in our pre-scientific ways of experiencing and interpreting that domain of being in which the area of subject matter is itself confined. The basic concepts which thus arise remain our proximal clues for disclosing this area concretely for the first time, and although research may always lean towards this positive approach, its real progress comes not so much from collecting results and storing them away in manuals as from inquiring into the ways in which each particular area is basically constituted, or Grundverfassungen, an inquiry to which we have been driven mostly by reacting against just such an increase in information. Let me just go over something real quick, because I had a thought and I wasn't 100% sure if it was applicable, because otherwise I'd rather not say, because it's a whole can of worms. Scientific research accomplishes roughly naively the initial fixings of areas of subject matter. Doubt after a fashion in our pre-scientific ways of experiencing and interpreting that domain of being in which the area of subject matter is itself confined. The basic concepts. Okay, I see what's going on right here. All right. Okay, I'm going to open the can. The Matrix demiurge type of thing, right? He's talking about how we had a certain pre-scientific language that this issue of science is building itself upon, and it's something unhealthy because it doesn't really think outside of the substance, which is an interesting. That may be a slightly wrong interpretation, but that whole passage is very deep, right? That whole passage is saying something very significant, right? Especially because it's calling the scientific research in the respects to these studies, it's subject to matter, right? And the being itself is, it's not matter at all. It's just, it's more like a pattern. It's more like an algorithm, right? And that algorithm doesn't have to express itself as data. It can show up in whatever way. It's going through a whole process of asking itself a yes. It's playing. It's like a computer plays 20 questions. That's what a computer is doing. It can only ask yes or no questions. It can only receive yes or no answers, et cetera, et cetera. Everything's a 1 and a 0. And binary code is based on the I Ching, mind you, right? And I've talked about this kind of thing before, and how, like the demiurge is a big egregore, okay? And so it's a false reality, but it's a real false reality, right? Because the people that give psychic charge to the egregore of the demiurge then thus fall prey to its performance system. This is why I always speak about our reality in terms of I will say myself, like, I have to deal with the simulation, but I'm definitely not in the simulation. I'm in the matrix. I'm not in the simulation. There's a simulation running in the matrix. That's why I actually like simulation theory, because I can deconstruct it in context, because I'm not going to let them try to dismiss the matrix itself. Funny how it is perhaps a Mandela effect that the word matrix now appears in the Bible. Isn't that a holy shit kind of moment? Especially when you think about the cyberpunk implications of what's going on. But matrix has a particular etymology. So it doesn't matter, what kind of punk you put in there. Cyberpunk, steampunk, magic punk, whatever you're going to punk up into a time period and have it be the defining technology, right? And that's why we get Iron Age, Bronze Age. We're in we're sort of in an age of radio waves right now, as almost everything is becoming almost wireless. It's like, when you think about what they can do with data transfer, you could have if it was 200% shielded, you could have like a no wires machine within its containment unit, which would be a shielded containment unit, meaning it's EMP proof. And then if it breaks down, there's no wires to replace, right? It's all one single thing, and it's working on such a high technology level that you're talking about every single part. We're not talking about it like a modular plug and play. We're talking about like it just auto syncs with every screw, nut, fucking anything. Any part that has to do something. But anyway, I'm going into really, really, really weird places. But I'm making a point, right? That is some sort of interesting thought that emerges within me, right? As I sit in my state of comfort. My state of comfort is my preferred state of being, right? And comfort does not mean lazy, right? this is, I'm putting on a presentation for you as comfortably as I choose to be, because this is how I think I ought to be accepted by the world. I ought to be able to give a speech at the UN with my shirt off, just because it's comfortable. It's just like you're comfortable in a suit. You got a very nice suit. I like the tie. I really do. It's cool. I don't like it. I don't like it. But because you insist on knowing why, it's because I think it's a hangman's noose and I won't wear it. But your tie is lovely, though. And I don't think of it as a hangman's noose on other people, just on me. You look like quite a distinguished professional gentleman. But I don't like hangman nooses. It's kind of strange. I don't care what material they're made out of and how gently they lay upon thy neck. Much like a certain couple of characters on a known tarot card that are favorable to necklaces. But anyway, funny how that works. I wear different chains and serve different masters. So where was I? I think I'm just going to hit the top of the page. Hitherto our arguments... Oh no, I'm sorry. Wow, I've been on this page for a long time. But that was all important. I didn't waste any time there. I just want you to understand that. That needed to be all said. I feel like a better person for having said that. All right. The real movement of the sciences takes place when their basic concepts undergo a more or less radical revision which is transparent to itself. The level which a science has reached is determined by how far it is capable of a crisis in its basic concepts. So right here is the kind of statement that gets certain people that call themselves the science very angry. I think I know who this sentence is for. I think we all know about a certain fellow in charge of a certain something in medicine for the government, who makes all sorts of clearances, recommendations, status inquiries, and payments, and works with the Pentagon for weaponizations, and all this fun stuff. You know, the science. I think this applies to the science. Okay, that was a fun rant. In such imminent crisis, the very relationship between positively investigative inquiries and those things themselves that are under interrogation come to a point where it begins to totter. Among the various disciplines, every day today, there are freshly awakened tendencies to put research on new foundations. Mathematics, which is seemingly the most rigorous and most firmly constructed of the sciences, has reached a crisis in its foundation in the controversy between the formalists and the intuitionists. Oh, interesting. I like this. This is very... I like it. Yeah, you had me at intuition. The issue is one of obtaining and securing the primary way of access to what are supposedly the objects of this science. The relativity theory of physics arises from the tendency to exhibit the interconnectedness of nature as it is in itself, as a theory of the conditions under which we have access to nature itself. It seeks to preserve the changelessness of the laws of motion by ascertaining all relativities, and thus comes up against the question of the structure of its own given area of study. The problem of matter. In biology, there is an awakening tendency to inquire beyond the definitions which mechanisms and vitalism have given for, quote, life, unquote, and, quote, organism, unquote, and to define anew the kind of being which belongs to the living as such. In those humane sciences which are historiological in character, let's get this annotation. In den historischen Geistwissenschaften, Heidegger makes much of the distinction between historic and Geschichte, and the corresponding adjectives historisch and Geschichtigt. Historic signs of history. History stands for what Heidegger calls a science of history. See H37 and 375, 378. Geschichte usually stands for the kind of history that actually happens. We shall, as a rule, translate these respectively as historiology and history, following similar conventions in handling the two adjectives. See especially section 6 and 76 below. I'm liking Heidegger a little bit more. Heidegger so far I like it. I like what I hear so far. Okay. The urge towards historical actuality itself has been strengthened in the course of time by tradition, by the way tradition has been presented and handed down. The history of literature is to become the history of problems. Theology is seeking a more primordial interpretation of man's being towards God, prescribed by the meaning of faith itself and remaining within it. It is slowly beginning to understand once more Luther's insight that the foundation on which its system of dogma rests has not arisen from an inquiry in which faith is primary, and that conceptually this foundation not only is inadequate for the problematic of theology, but conceals and distorts it. You know, and by the way, when you think about Luther and, the Lutheran Church, the Protestants, the Protestant leader who led a rebellion that took a big chunk of Catholics out of Catholicism. His name was Luther, which is kind of like Lucifer. I just got that. I don't know, maybe I'm stretching, but it's close enough to the tongue to at least be a good pun. All right. Basic concepts determine the way in which we get an understanding beforehand of the area of subject matter. Underlying all the objects a science takes as its theme, and all positive investigation is guided by this understanding. Only after the area itself has been explored beforehand in a corresponding manner do these concepts become genuinely demonstrated and grounded. But since every such area is itself obtained from the domain of entities themselves, this preliminary research from which the basic concepts are drawn signifies nothing else than an interpretation of these entities with regard to their basic state of being. Such research must run ahead of the positive sciences, and it can. Here, the work of Plato and Aristotle is evidence enough. Laying the foundation for the sciences in this way is different in principle from the kind of logic which limps along after, investigating the status of some science as it chances to find it in order to discover its method. Laying the foundation, as we have described it, is rather productive logic in the sense that it leaps ahead, as it were, into some area of being, discloses it for the first time in the constitution of its being, and after thus arriving at the structure within it, makes these available to the positive sciences as transparent assignments for their inquiry. And see how the context of constitution is popped up, right? Which is a good argument for design, which is, what most of this book is arguing for design. And here we have our first annotation. Al Durchtig and Weisungen des Fragens. That's all I got. All right. Whoops. A pinch. Okay. To give an example, what is philosophically primary is neither a theory of the concept formation of historiology, nor the theory of historiological knowledge, nor yet the theory of history as the object of historiology. What is primary is rather the interpretation of authentically historical entities as regards their historicality. Similar, the positive outcome of Kant's critique of pure reason lies in what it has contributed towards the working out of what belongs to any nature whatsoever, not in theory of knowledge. His transcendental logic is an a priori logic for the subject matter of that area of being called nature. But such an inquiry itself, ontology, taken in the widest sense, without favoring any particular ontological direction or tendency, requires a further clue. Ontological inquiry is indeed more primordial as over against the ontical. I missed 2, and we're at 3, so we're going to read both of those. Sondern die Interpretation des eigentlich geschichtlich Senden auf sein Geschlecht. We shall translate the frequently occurring term Geschichte historically. Heidegger very occasionally uses the term Historisitat as on H20 below, and this will be translated as historicity. And I am saying that correctly. There is an H there every single time. There's P's in certain places, but it's often H, and I'm not exactly sure why it's H, other than Heidegger. And then 3. While the terms ontisch or ontical and ontologisch or ontological are not explicitly defined, their meanings will emerge rather clearly. Ontological inquiry is concerned primarily with being. Ontical inquiry is concerned primarily with entities and the facts about them. Interesting, right? That's kind of like saying, okay, how do we prove that an alien exists? How do we know what the alien is? And of course, you have to prove the alien exists first in order for this question to matter at all. Matter, subject matter. Subject matter. All right. the ontical inquiries of the positive sentences, or positive sciences, but it remains itself naive and opaque if in its researches into the being of entities it fails to discuss the meaning of being in general, and even the ontological task of constructing a non-deductive genealogy of the different possible ways of being requires that we first come to an understanding of what we really mean by this expression, being. See, right here, right now, there's a larger conversation that is going mainstream that proves how right Heidegger was about this particular problem in the sciences. Whether you agree with him about what meaning is by the end of this book, it doesn't matter as much as do you agree with this question in context to the science of ufology and exopolitics now, as people are starting to wonder, is there some sort of weird in and out of off-world civilizations, like, that our government doesn't know what to do about or something? Like, is this real? Is this real life right now? Right? The government is... the government right now is acting pretty goddamn serious about this. And it's a little scary considering the cognitive dissonance literally happening in the executive branch that's supposed to be in charge of those people. Yet I don't see why World War III didn't kick off, so, maybe everything's going to be all right. I don't know. But what I do know is that now the question of are they interdimensional is being taken very seriously, or at least are they using like portals or something, right? It's just like you're getting into some wacky wavy quantum shit, right? There's a very dark road that we can go down if we go with the people that Heidegger doesn't like, the way that I see it. I don't think that Heidegger likes these people because he's hitting them over the head with the sword of Damocles, and I kind of like it. It's my style. Some German blunt fucking object. But anyway. The question of being aims, therefore, at ascertaining the a priori... Am I in the right spot? Remains... I must be. The a priori conditions, not only for the possibility of the sciences which examine entities as entities of such and such a type, and in so doing already operate with an understanding of being, but also for the possibility of those ontologies themselves, which are prior to the ontical sciences and which provide their foundations. Basically, all ontology, no matter how rich and provide their basically all ontology, no matter how rich and firmly compacted a science of categories it has at its disposal, remains blind and perverted from its own most aim, if it has not first adequately clarified the meaning of being and conceived this clarification as its fundamental task. Ontological research itself, when properly understood, gives to the question of being an ontological priority which goes beyond mere presumptions of a venerable tradition and advance with a problem that has hitherto been opaque, but this objectivity, scientific priority, is not the only one. Okay. Merge clearly. Yeah, okay, so we did go through all those. Good. All right. Next page. All right. We're at part 4. Man, this shit just dries you right up. I hope in the future I get some positive feedback. I'd love to hear your comments, by the way. If you think that these thoughts are as profound as I do. 4. The ontical priority of the question of being. Science in general may be defined as the totality established through an interconnection of true propositions. This definition is not complete, nor does it reach the meaning of science. As ways in which man behaves, sciences have the manner of being which this entity, man himself, possesses. This entity we denote by the term Dasein. Let's see, I already skipped one. Let's go down. Das ganz eins, big word, hold on. Das ganz eins Begründungszusammenhanges Wahrsatzke. It's like, it's a bunch of pretty simple, like, syllables, but, like, it's just like, you need a second to, like, if you're not used to saying those kinds of sounds in concession, it's such a tongue twister. CH357 below. Okay. Scientific research is not the manner of being which this entity can have, nor is it the one which lies closest. Moreover, Dasein itself has a special distinctiveness as compared with other entities, and it is worth our while to bring this to view in a provisional way. All right, so he's saying that the Dasein is something not only different than an entity, but special. Interesting. All right, so let's get, because, you know, I said earlier that, like, kind of like Dasein and soul, right? So maybe I'll have a stronger understanding of Dasein or a stronger understanding of the word entity. Let's figure out which way and where I am confused. Moreover, Dasein itself, is compared to other entities and is worth our while to bring this to view in a provisional way. Here our discussion must anticipate later analysis in which our results will be authentically exhibited for the first time. Dasein is an entity which does not just occur among other entities. Rather, it is ontically distinguished by the fact that in its very being, that being is an issue for it. But in that case, this is a constitutive state of Dasein's being, and this implies that Dasein, in its being, has a relationship towards that being, a relationship which itself is one of being. And this means further that there is some way in which Dasein understands itself in its being, and that to some degree it does so explicitly. It is peculiar to this entity that with and through its being, this being is disclosed to it. Understanding of being is itself a definite characteristic of Dasein's being. Dasein is ontically distinctive in that it is ontological. Okay, I skipped 2 and we're at 3. Zu dieser Seinwassersung, das Daseins gehört aber dann, dass es in sein zu diesem Sein ein Seinverhältnis hat. This passage is ambiguous and might also be read as, and this implies that Dasein in its being towards this being has a relationship of being. So it's distinct, but it also seems that it is in a permanent kind of consorted relationship almost, right? We could be looking at a distinction between the anima and the animus. We could be looking at a distinction between perhaps the ego and the soul, and to understand that your ego is something that does have value. All right? But your ego also is something that is there to make a sacrifice for you, right? You are your ego's God, okay? And that's why your ego will die. But then it comes back. You get a reboot on your personality when the world has crushed you and has forced you to change. Let's be real. Who likes the old Steve? Who likes the old Steve? Isn't it, how many people do you know that you've seen, quote, change, can run around and speak like I do about myself only 2 years ago as if a completely different person? My whole world died, and I resented people. I resented the people that didn't see it. People I live with didn't see it. But I know many of you out there, most of you that are my friends, you went through the same experience and are here because you get it like I get it. And that's why this core group of people that are back and that were always there before I was cut, it's because you've been to the land of fuck it too. You've been to the land where every little good, true, and beautiful fucking thing about the old world fucking fell right out of your goddamn hands. And if you didn't have a personal state of being, you just would have fallen with it. But you knew the difference. And you died unto your old self. This is not Christianity. This is Othenism, which is one part of the things that I am and do. Three, das es ontologisch ist, en ontologisch may be either an adjective or an adverb, we might also write. That it is ontologically, a similar ambiguity occurs in the two following sentences where we read ontologisch sein and and respectively. Here, being ontological is not yet tantamount to developing an ontology. So if we should reserve the term ontology for that theoretical inquiry which is explicitly devoted to the meaning of entities, then what we have had in mind in speaking of Dasein's being ontological is to be designed as something pre-ontological. It does not signify simply being ontological, however, but rather being in such a way that one has an understanding of being. That kind of being towards which Dasein can comport itself in one way or another, and always does comport itself somehow, we call existence or existence. It's kind of like the way they spell it in the movie, existence, that's very cool. I wonder if Heidegger was in mind when they wrote that film. And because we cannot define Design's essence by citing a what of the kind that pertains to a subject matter, eins Saghaltigen was, and because its essence lies rather in the fact that in each case it has its being to be, and has it as its own. We have chosen to designate this entity as Design, a term which is purely an expression of its being, als reiner Seiseldruck. And then there's the first annotation of the page. Das es Design sein als sin Egesei zu sin hat. Design always understands itself in terms of its existence, in terms of a possibility of itself, to be itself or not itself. Design has either chosen these possibilities itself, or got itself into them, or grown up in them already. Only the particular Design decides its existence, whether it does so by taking hold or by neglecting. The question of existence never gets straightened out except through existence itself. The understanding of oneself which leads along this way we call existentiel. And then we're at the second annotation. We shall translate existentiel by existentiel and existential by existential. There seems to be little reason for resorting to the more elaborate neologisms proposed by other writers. That's an interesting insert. I'm not quite sure what he means by his insert, other than just explaining his choice of how he's going to translate it. And there seems to be a little reason for resorting to the more elaborate logisma proposed by other writers. He's saying that there are other writers that would have done things different, but doesn't work in context here. Dissident Jones. Boom. You're big dog, Dissy. All right. I'm going to be done in a couple of minutes here. Okay, so where were we? We're at 2. Okay. The question of existence is one of Design's ontical affairs. This does not require that the ontological structure of existence should be theoretically transparent. The question about that structure aims at the analysis, or the Auseinanderlegung of what constitutes existence, the context of Zusammenhang of such structures we call existentiality. Its analytic has the character of an understanding which is not existentiel, but rather existential. The task of an existential analytic of Design has been delineated in advance as regards both its possibility and its necessity in Design's ontical constitution. So far as existence is the determining character of Design, the ontological analytic of this entity always requires that existentiality be considered beforehand. By essentiality, we understand the state of being that is constitutive for those entities that exist. But in the idea of such a constitutive state of being, the idea of being is already included, and thus even the possibility of carrying through the analytic of Design depends on the working out beforehand the question about the meaning of being in general. Sciences are ways of being in which Design comports itself towards entities which it needs not be itself, but to design. Being in a world is something that belongs essentially. Thus, Dasein's understanding of being pertains with equal primordiality, both to an understanding of something like a world and to the understanding of the being of those entities, which become accessible within the world. Then we have 3. Innerhalb der Welt. Heidegger uses at least 3 expressions which might be translated as in the world, innerhalb der Welt, in der Welt, and the adjective or adverb innerweltlich. We shall translate these respectively by within the world, in the world, and within the world. So whenever an ontology takes for its theme entities whose character of being is other than that of Dasein, it has its own foundation and motivation in Dasein's own ontical structure, in which a pre-ontological understanding of being is comprised as a definite characteristic. Give me a moment to just look at... Okay. Excellent. Oh, perfect. We're gonna get all the way through the first part of the introduction. There's then a second part to the introduction. Then it gets into the actual book itself, which has a part 1, and then I don't see a part 2. But there's Division 1 and Division 2 within Part 1, and those things, that'll be another day. Okay, so... Therefore, fundamental ontology, from which alone all other ontologies can take their rise, must be sought in the existential analytic of Dasein. Dasein accordingly takes priority over all entities in several ways. The first priority is an ontical one. Dasein is an entity whose being has a determinate character of existence. We should be asking this question about AI. Does AI know it exists? The second priority is an ontological one. Dasein is in itself ontological because existence is thus determinative for it, but with equal primordiality. Dasein also possesses as constitutive for its understanding of existence an understanding of the being of all entities of a character other than its own. Dasein has therefore a third priority as providing the ontico-ontological condition for the possibility of any ontologies. Thus, Dasein has turned out to be more than any other entity, the one which must first be interrogated ontologically. But the roots of the existential analytic on its part are ultimately existentiel, that is, ontical, only if the inquiry of the philosophical research is itself seized upon in an existential manner as a possibility of the being of each existing Dasein. Does it become at all possible to disclose the existentiality of existence and to undertake an adequately founded ontological problematic? But with this, the ontical priority of the question of being has to also become plain. Dasein's ontico-ontological priority has seen quite early, though, Dasein itself was not grasped in its genuine ontological structure and did not even become a problem in which this structure was sought. Aristotle says, some shit in Greek, man's soul is, in a certain way, entities. The soul which makes up the being a man has, which then there's another word that seems like it's in Greek, and I don't see that word in the statement above, and another word that also is not in the statement above, among its ways of being, and in certain discoveries all entities, both in the fact that they are in their being as they are, that is always in their being. Aristotle's principle, which points back to the ontological thesis of Parmenides, is one which Thomas Aquinas has taken up in a characteristic discussion. Thomas is engaged in the task of deriving the transcendentia, those characters of being which lie beyond every possible way in which an entity may be classified as coming under some generic kind of subject matter. Are we possibly talking about interdimensional entities? Where was I? Subject matter. Ah, yes. Every modus specialis entis, and which belongs necessarily to anything, whatever it may be. Thomas has to demonstrate that the verum is such a transcendence. Sorry about that. Oh, my God. It's been a day. Trust me, it's been a day. He does this by invoking an entity which, in accordance with its very manner of being, is properly suited to come together with entities of any sort whatever. This distinctive entity, the ens quod naturam est convire cum omni ante, is the soul, or anima. Then I think we got 7? That looks like it's a 6. Oh, okay, you know what? Oh, well, they're not there, though. These are probably... Okay, this PDF actually has an index for English, Latin, Greek, and proper names. I'm not going to put that much planning ahead into that. If you guys are supportive of me, then I can sacrifice more time to preparation for these shows. Otherwise, this is all happening in my downtime of days where I'm really working on myself. Or I'm working. Or I am having my fucking design. Anyway. So anima is actually mentioned over here. That's great. This distinctive entity, the ens quod natum est convenire cum omne ent, is the soul. Or he's saying the anima is the soul. So the animus is not the soul because one's important to the other depending on your gender. Here, the priority of design over all other entities emerges, although it has not been ontologically clarified. This priority has obviously nothing in common with a vicious subjectivizing of the totality of entities. He calls it a vicious subjectivizing, right? He doesn't like the subject matter conversation about the human soul. I like this guy. Anyway, by indicating design's ontological priority in this provisional manner, we have grounded our demonstration that the question of being is ontologically distinctive. But when we analyzed the structure of this question as such in section 2, we came up against a distinctive way in which this entity functions in the very formulation of that question. Design then reveals itself as that entity which must first be worked out in an ontological adequate manner, if the inquiry is to become a transparent one. But now it has been shown that the ontological analytic of design is, in general, is what makes up fundamental ontology, so that Dasein functions as the entity which in principle is to be interrogated beforehand as to its being. This sounds a whole lot like if you're possessed by some sort of spirit, and you have to have it's like a hostage negotiation, like Damien, you let Zerilath go. No, your mother sucks cocks in hell. But anyway, if to interpret the meaning of being becomes our task, Dasein is not only the primary entity to be interrogated, it is also the entity which already comports itself in its being towards what we are asking about when we ask this question. But in that case, the question of being is nothing other than the radicalization of an essential tendency of being, which belongs to Dasein itself, the pre-ontological understanding of being. He's effectively talking about the soul. And the reason why it's such a funky question is because he was doing this work at a time where science, being the leaders of thinking in the country, in psychology and every other field, were basically averting that, which was making people go further into their personas and separating themselves from their souls and mistaking themselves with their egos. And the mistaking yourself with your ego is where the thinking of humanity flipped in a certain way. Right? I mean, when we were consciously doing it, because everybody was using the word ego. It's part of our normal talk. We talk about people, we'll bring up like, oh, and your ego and this and that. And then like the person who has to hear how their ego is the problem just feels like somebody's using psychobabble to avoid an issue. And then, creates a mind game that isn't really fucking there. And it's fucking annoying. And now people can't handle authenticity. So they have to react to the authentic man like he's like his persona is designed as some sort of I don't know what. I don't even know what. But anyway, this has been a badass little presentation. I want to thank Freya and Hella Black, Benjamin Balderson, and Dissident Jones for participating in chat. Thank you anybody else who was silently listening. Thank you everybody that will be listening, everybody that hit the like, share, subscribe, and bell notifications. And thank you if you also went to any of my social media pages. I'll have to put all that stuff in the box down below. Some of it's different now. I have a different email address. If you want to get a tarot rune reading from me, do not go to freedomslips.com. It's yahoo.com now. Zerilath@yahoo.com. I'll put that in the description below after the stream is over. Thanks so much, guys. You have a kick-ass night.